Hey friends, how's it going? My name is Gabby. Welcome back to my channel. Today we're going to be doing another round of some thriller book recommendations, and I'm so excited because this is actually going to be round 13 of thriller book recommendations on my channel. So I have made a video recommendation like this 12 different times before. I will have all the previous thriller book recommendation videos listed down below in the description. This is a video series that I have loved to do on my channel pretty much ever since my channel started. It's always like my hope and my goal to post one of these videos around every 6 months, but the last time that I posted one was actually in August of last year. So it's almost been like 9 to 10 months since the last time that I posted one of these. And I think the main reason for that is because I feel like as I'm reading more and more thrillers, I feel like I get a little bit more cynical and critical of the thrillers that I'm reading. And I only want to recommend to you some of my top favorites. And so that's why it's taking me longer to put out these videos than normal. But I do have a good stack of thrillers today that I'm going to be recommending to you that I've read in the last 10 months that I think are truly worthy of a recommendation. But before we do jump into today's video, I just wanted to take a second to thank today's video sponsor, which is Ritual, because I've tried so many probiotics before, and this is the one that seems like it's actually making a difference. So this Synbiotic is a 3-in-1 supplement that supports gut and digestive health. And this one's really convenient that it's a 3-in-1 because it includes the prebiotic, the probiotic, and the postbiotic as well. And Synbiotic is the first gut supplement that I've taken that really feels like it's starting to make a difference. And if you're new to taking gut supplements, then you might not know, but there are more than just the physical benefits. Probiotics can help to support your immune health, and then it can also help to support through some of like the daily disturbances of life. Like stress can definitely affect your gut. Anytime you're traveling, that can affect your gut, and this can be there to help support. I really love with the Synbiotic, it's more than just the probiotic because it also contains the prebiotic and the postbiotic in one daily capsule. And it contains 2 of the world's most clinically studied probiotic strains. And I think adding Synbiotic to your routine is so simple because you only take 1 capsule daily. These do not have to be refrigerated, so they can just be kept on a shelf. And then you can take them anytime during the day. They do not have to be taken with food, and they're subscription based, so you never run out. So be sure to use my code gabbyreads25 to get 25% off your first order. You can use the link down in the description, or you can scan the QR code that's on the screen. And if you don't like Ritual within the first 30 days, then your first order is on them, which is very cool. So definitely be sure to check out Ritual, and thank you so much to Ritual for sponsoring today's video. So jumping right into the thriller recommendations, I wanted to start with the book that I think is probably like my favorite thriller that I've read so far in the year of 2024, and that's gotta be Kill for Me, Kill for You. This book just published in the month of March. I actually read it back in January for a reading vlog that I did where I was reading some arcs for this year. So I'll have the reading vlog included down below if you wanted to check it out, but this book was so much fun. So this book takes place in New York City, and it's definitely one of those books that's kind of inspired by like Strangers on a Train, where 2 strangers meet and they decide to commit murder for each other. So in this story, we're following these characters named Amanda and Wendy, and they realize that they have a lot in common, especially when it comes to the idea of them wanting to get revenge against these men who have wronged their families and they just got away with it. And so they both decide, because they have these things in common, they want to help each other out and get justice for their children. But what I really like about this book is that it does have that kind of trope, kind of like Strangers on a Train, where like 2 strangers are going to commit murder for each other. But then we also get another point of view in this book from this woman named Ruth, and she is living alone with her husband Scott when their home gets invaded. And then she's attacked by this man, but then he ends up leaving her alive and he takes off. And she's trying to figure out why this guy invaded her home, and she's struggling with the idea of like she's never going to feel safe again. And so in this book, we get a number of different point of views, but I loved getting the multiple point of views in this book, and I loved that all of the chapters were very short. It was so easy to fly through this. I literally probably could have finished this in one sitting if I wanted to, but I was reading this during a really busy time where I had a lot going on, but it was one of those books where I could not wait to pick it back up because I was so invested in what was happening, and I just think this was so fun. This is definitely one of those thrillers that has gripped me the most. Like, it's one of those books where as soon as you pick it up, it just grips you right away and you can't stop thinking about it until you finish it. And I love that, and it's been a long time since I've had that feeling with a thriller, so this is definitely my highest recommendation that you should take from this video. This was so great. This next book is one that I personally struggle to call this book a thriller, really. It definitely feels a little bit more on the literary side, but because this book was featured on like the thrillers list of the Goodreads Choice Awards last year, I decided to put it in this video anyway. But it's Bright Young Women by Jessica Knoll, and this was actually one of my BookTube book club picks for the month of January, and this is one of my new favorite books of all time. time. Like, I loved this so much. This story definitely reads more like a literary style of like mystery thriller. It definitely has the like mystery thriller vibes to it, but this one to me, it reads a lot more of like a slow burn. It reads a lot more like a character study. And I think the reason for me why this book was so impactful is because it's kind of inspired by real life events, because this story is like loosely inspired by the real life sorority that was targeted by Ted Bundy. This is like the story of the women, you know, this is the story about the survivors of this situation. And I feel like this book was really touching and really moving because it for once takes the spotlight away from the serial killer, and it's really a story that's about the women and about their experience going through something like this. But I still think this does have like the mystery thriller elements to it, where like the writing and the tone of the book, it does read like a mystery thriller, and there is, you know, like some mystery and suspense to this story, but it really is more of like a literary style of writing where you just really connect with the characters and it makes you feel a lot. I just really love and respect this book so much for what it stands for and what it's doing, because for once it's showing that like this man who's a serial killer, like in this book he's never named, not even one time. I feel like so oftentimes people will just glamorize serial killers or try to act like they're such fucking geniuses, and I love how this book is like, no, he's not a genius, he's a typical misogynistic loser. And I just love how this book really just like brings him back down to reality while not ever even mentioning his name. I just thought it was so well done. It's so beautifully written, and this is definitely one that I would highly recommend to check out. The next book that I have to recommend on this list is another one that it definitely reads like mystery thriller, but there's a lot more elements to this story as well, and that's The Other Side of Night by Adam Hamdy. And this is one that I just read recently. This one's actually a more backlist book because I think this one came out in 2022, but I just read it this year, and like holy shit, I'm so glad that I did, because this was a 5-star for me. Like, I loved this so freaking much, because in this story there's like a lot of different parts and a lot of different things happening. The story starts with this guy named David, and he's writing about his biggest regret, which was his sudden separation from his son Elliot. But then the main story is happening with this police officer, and her name is Harriet, and she's trying to clear her name after she had a lapse of judgment. But then she discovers this book that was like a library book, and on the inside of the book she finds a note that says, "Help, he's trying to kill me," and she's trying to figure out like who could have written this note. And then this note leads her to this guy David, and this guy David was last seen stepping off of a cliff, and the police just suspect that he couldn't cope with like his wife's death that just happened recently. So she starts to wonder, like, was it the wife that wrote this note about this guy David? And she starts to uncover a lot of secrets about this family and like secrets from the past. There's also this guy Ben that she used to be kind of like romantically involved with, and then she finds out that he's kind of like involved in whatever might be happening with these people, and she's starting to wonder if this guy that she once had feelings for, like, could he be a killer? Could he be a murderer? Like, is he involved in this situation? This book was just so fascinating. I do think this one, to me, it does read a little bit more on like the literary side as well. Like, it doesn't have the typical writing of like a mystery thriller, like that's for sure. It's definitely more slow burn, but this one was wild because the second half of this book just goes completely off the rails, and like the freaking plot twist in this book, like my jaw was like dropped onto the floor. Like, I could not believe where this book ended up going. It was the most unexpected things happening at the end of this book, and I loved that about it. And I feel like this is one of those rare thrillers that I really like emotionally connected with it, and I found myself like crying at the end of this book, which rarely ever happens for me with thrillers, but I feel like this is one of those stories where you really get attached to the characters and like the message that this author is trying to send. When I read this book in the vlog, I was talking about how the writing style kind of felt similar to something of like Matt Haig's writing, which I do still stand by. I think this is a thriller that kind of reads like Matt Haig, and so if you like Matt Haig and you like crazy plot twists at the end of your books, then I think this is definitely one to check out. Another one that I thought I would mention here, because this one also has like the literary feel to it, is going to be Night Watching by Tracy Sierra. And this is another one that it's getting pitched a lot as like a mystery thriller, and I don't know if I fully agree with that, because I feel like this one's more of like a literary suspense story, because in this story we're following this woman who is never named, by the way. Like, all of the characters in this book don't have names, which I didn't notice while I was reading it, but I think it's kind of a cool choice because it makes you feel like this could happen to anybody, and I think that's really scary and just adds to the eeriness of it all. But we're following this mother in this book who is alone in the house with her 2 children when a man breaks into her home, and she can hear that there's like this stranger in the house, and then she feels like she might recognize him, and that's kind of where the like ooh eerie mystery weirdness of it all comes in. But in this story, the reason why I say that this one's more of like a literary suspense instead of like a typical mystery thriller is because this one is such a slow burn. This book is definitely more of like a character study. It's more of like a psychological story story, getting into the mind of this main character. And I personally really enjoyed this. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. Like, I thought it was a really good time, but I will warn you that this book is really slow paced. I could see some people saying that nothing really happens in this book until like the last like 30%, and like they would be right. Like, nothing really happens in this book until the end. But I don't know why. I feel like if you enjoyed books like The Push, I think you would really like this. If you enjoyed like Long Bright River, you know, like stories like that where it's more of like literary kind of character studies, but there's still those like underlying tones of like a mystery thriller, then I do think you would really like this one. But just know what you're getting into, you know, like I think if you go into this knowing it's going to be more of a slow burn character study, then I think you would like it more. The next book that I wanted to recommend is If Something Happens to Me by Alex Finlay. This is a thriller that really surprised me this year because I wasn't expecting to like this book as much as I did, because I have read a book from Alex Finlay before and I wasn't the biggest fan of it, so I went into this one with some pretty low expectations. But this book is so fun and it was so fast paced because we follow a number of different characters in this. The main storyline that's happening though is with this guy named Ryan, and back when he was in high school he was living in this small town in Kansas, and he was with his girlfriend Allison in his car when all of a sudden he got like a blow to the head, and when he woke up the car was missing and his girlfriend Allison was also missing. And so now the main storyline is taking place 5 years later when they still have not heard anything about his girlfriend or the car. Like, they have no idea what happened. But then 5 years later he's on this trip in Italy when he gets a phone call, and they said back in the small town in Kansas they have found Allison's car, and inside the car they found this note that says, "If something happens to me." And so it kind of like reopens this whole investigation into like what actually happened to his girlfriend 5 years ago. And so we do follow a number of different perspectives in this book, because we not only get Ryan's perspective as he's, you know, in Italy on this trip, and his perspective is really interesting because he thinks that he sees somebody, like this man who could have been involved on the night that his girlfriend went missing. But then we also do get the perspective of like the local sheriff who's like working in the small town in Kansas still. And then we also do get the perspective of this guy named Shane, who's like this mobster dude that lives in Philadelphia, and he's also going through like a tragedy of his own with his son. So that's kind of a unique and interesting perspective, and all of the perspectives do end up coming together in a really interesting way. But I loved getting the different point of views because it made this book fly so fast. This book has like the shortest chapters. I feel like something this author does really well in this book is that at the end of every chapter it almost ends on like a little bit of a cliffhanger, like just something to keep you coming back and just keep wanting to read. I actually flew through this entire book in like one afternoon because of how addicting the writing style was. Like, I just couldn't put it down. All right, and then the next book that I wanted to recommend is going to be The Heiress by Rachel Hawkins. I've read every single thriller that Rachel Hawkins has put out so far, and I think that I can confidently say that this one is probably my favorite from her so far, because this one had the best atmosphere to me. Like, this one had like the southern gothic vibes atmosphere, but it also kind of gave me Evelyn Hugo vibes a little bit, like Evelyn Hugo but with murder. Because in this story we're primarily following the story of this character named Ruby, and by the time that this book is taking place she's actually passed away. So the main story is being told from this guy named Camden, who was her adopted son. And so what ends up happening is that after Ruby passes away, Camden ends up like leaving the home, leaving the family. He doesn't want anything to do with them. He marries this woman named Jules, and he like moves to Colorado. He has a completely different life. But then 10 years later, his uncle's death pulls him back to Ashby House. And so this is about how like 10 years later he's going to be returning to Ashby House with his wife Jules. And then in between the chapters we get both Camden and Jules. We get both of their perspectives, and then in between the chapters we do get the diary entries from this character Ruby, and her diary entries are so interesting because they kind of read like a Evelyn Hugo style of like storytelling to me. Character Ruby, you know, like his mom, she was known to have all these different husbands, and so in her lifetime she had 4 different husbands, and they had all died under kind of like mysterious circumstances, almost to the point where people were like questioning, like, is she involved with like killing her husbands, or like what the heck is going on, like how much of this is just a coincidence. But then there's also like a lot of mystery in this book just surrounding like Ruby's character in general. Like, there was this story of how she like disappeared for a time as a little girl, and they kind of like wonder what really happened to her when that happened. And there's also the mystery of like, why did Ruby decide to adopt Camden in the first place? And so this one just had all of the great great atmosphere too, because it takes place at this like Ashby house in the South, and it's very like gothic vibes. I don't know, it just had really great atmosphere. I got really pulled into the story. I loved the kind of like mixed media elements of the story, because there would be a lot of like news articles in between and just like emails, and then like getting the diary entries from Ruby's character were some of my favorite parts of this book. This next one is one that I cannot believe that these words are coming out of my mouth. Like, I cannot believe that this is a book that I'm recommending to you, but it's Home is Where the Bodies Are by Geneva Rose. And if you know my history with this author, Geneva Rose, then you'll know that I have not really enjoyed any of her books that she's come out with in the past. And this is one that I actually recently just read for the reading vlog that I just posted before this video. And I was just so hesitant to read this one because of my experience with her past books. But this one, I was mildly surprised by how much I ended up enjoying this book. And something that I think is really interesting about this one is that we're following these 3 different siblings, and right at the start of this book, their mother passes away. But right before the mom dies, she says to the oldest sister, she just goes like, "Oh, don't trust about your father," and then she just kind of dies and like doesn't really get to finish what she was trying to say. And so in this story, you're following the 3 siblings as they're kind of like returning to their home to like take care of their mother's things and get everything set up for like her funeral and all that. But like the siblings, they haven't talked to each other in the last like 7 years. Like they just are not on good terms with each other. The younger sister has fallen into being a drug addict, and so they don't really talk to her as much. And then the brother had this story where he like, you know, moved away and started a life somewhere else, and so like he just doesn't really talk to them anymore. And so there's a lot of like tension and kind of like toxic energy between these siblings that I was really interested in when I read this book. Like I don't know, sometimes I really do love reading about the toxic sibling relationships, and I find the dynamics to be really interesting. And with this, like they definitely kind of reminded me of like the siblings in like How to Sell a Haunted House by Grady Hendrix, where like there's a lot of history there, there's a lot of tension there. But then the interesting thing that makes this book a mystery thriller is that when they're clearing out some of their parents' stuff, they find these like home videotapes that they don't recognize, and they find videos of their parents doing some kind of horrifying shit back in the 90s. And they start to realize like, oh my gosh, like, could our parents have been involved in some like weird freaky shit back in the day? And it's like they have to start to figure out like, do we want to like report this? Do we want to take this to the police? Because their mom is like dead at this point, and they're kind of like, is there a point in us bringing this forth as evidence, or like what should we do on this? So it was really interesting for me. I loved getting the perspective of all 3 of the siblings throughout the book, but then we also do get their mom's point of view in like flashback chapters of the 90s. So I really liked getting all the different perspectives. And I do think the ending of this book was a little bit twisty. Like it got a little bit surprising. There were a few things that I personally didn't see coming, and I really loved the last chapter, or like the epilogue of this book. And I am shocked and flabbergasted that I have Geneva Rose on a recommendation list. But look at this. Another book that was also kind of like a lovely surprise for me is gonna be The Unraveling by Vi Keeland. And if you didn't know, Vi Keeland is actually primarily a romance author. She's a romance author that I've read a few of her romance books, and I have enjoyed them in the past. But from what I know, this is her first thriller, and this one that I have is actually an ARC copy. This one's going on sale July 9th, so it's coming out next month. And this is one that I was really surprised by how much I enjoyed it, because I don't typically enjoy like romantic thrillers, and this one definitely has a little bit more of a romantic thriller kind of vibe to it. But this one just read so quickly, and it was so entertaining. And it's like, for me, it was one of those books that it felt like a train wreck that I couldn't pull my eyes away from. And in this story, we're following this character named Meredith, and she is a therapist, and she's going through a lot of really hard grief recently, and she gets this guy, this new client, and his name is Gabriel. But the thing is that he is connected to like the situation that happened with her grief in a really weird way, and so she knows that it's unethical for her to be his therapist, because they have this like shared experience that she doesn't even know that if he knows about, the way that they've shared this experience. But she decides to like continue being his therapist despite knowing that it's probably like wrong for her to do that. And this book was just so fascinating. It was so interesting. It was just so freaking juicy to me. And I feel like this book definitely had some like tricks up its sleeve. You know, like there were some things at the ending that I personally didn't see coming. I thought it was fun. I thought it was twisty. I feel like this is one of those thrillers that's like really juicy because it's a bunch of characters that are doing some shit that you know is wrong. Like, you know, as the reader, you're like, yikes, I can't root for any of these people, but it's just fascinating. It's entertainment. And so I had a great time with this thriller. I ended up giving this one 4 stars. I was pleasantly surprised, and I do think that if you typically do like kind of more romantic thrillers, I think you would love this. I think you would eat the shit up. All right, the next recommendation that I have for you is actually Daughter of Mine by Megan Miranda. This is the newest Megan Miranda that just came out in the month of April, and this is another one that I was very pleasantly surprised by because I don't typically enjoy Megan Miranda's books either, but there was something about this one specifically that really worked for me. This would be like the perfect thriller to read in the summertime. I'll just say that right away because there was something about this book. It was like the summer vibes in this one. I think it's because she's like near the water the whole time, but this one was really interesting. We're following this character named Hazel Sharp, and she is actually the daughter of the town's detective, but then she unexpectedly inherits the home that she grew up in after the detective dies. But what's interesting is that, you know, the detective, he also does have two sons that are both police officers, but instead he decides to leave the house to her, even though she's like left this small town. But then as she's coming back to the small town, she's starting to uncover these different secrets in her family, and especially there's something that ends up happening like almost right at the beginning of this book that leads her to uncover the truth of like what might have actually happened to her mother who disappeared many years ago. And so this was just really interesting. This one definitely had that like small town sitting by the lake kind of atmosphere to it. I really did like, you know, the kind of complicated relationship that she had with her brothers who are like still living in this town. I don't know why lately I'm just really loving the kind of like slightly toxic sibling relationships. I find it to be really interesting to read in thrillers like this, and I just had a really good time with it. I think the only reason why I ended up giving this one around like a 3.5 stars, and the only reason why I didn't rate it higher than that was because I do feel like some of the ending for this book was a little bit predictable for me, and it didn't like 100% stick the landing. But otherwise, I still think this is worth recommending. I think this is a really quick, easy to read thriller that I had a really fun time with, and I think it's really atmospheric. And then I also wanted to recommend this thriller called How I'll Kill You, and this is one that I read at the end of last year, and this is another one that I was kind of surprised by how much I ended up enjoying this book. So in this story, we follow these 3 sisters who are triplets, and they have been known to kill their boyfriends. So in this story, we're following the youngest sister named Jade, and now it's like her turn to like kill her boyfriend, and it's like the first boyfriend that she's ever had, but she's starting to actually like catch real feelings for him, and she's starting to fall in love with him, and she doesn't know if she can bring herself to actually kill her boyfriend like her sisters did. And this book was kind of silly and fun, but I ended up liking this one a lot. You know, the most shocking thing about this book for me was the fact that I was actually really invested in the romance that was happening. I thought they were so cute. Like, I was kind of also like, girl, no, you can't kill him, because I was like, they're adorable together, like they were so cute. And so I feel like if you're one of those people who really loves some romance in your thrillers, I think you would also eat this shit up because it was just so cute. And I really liked the pressure though that she was getting from her sisters to like kill her boyfriend, and like all the tension that was happening because of that. It also kind of reminded me of one of my favorite horror books. It reminded me of Brother by Anya Alborn because of the way that we're following a character who is like, they exist in a family of killers, and like the family's trying to encourage them to like kill who they're dating, and like they don't want to do that because they're starting to catch feelings. It definitely had a similar vibe to Brother, so I also think if you liked Brother, I think you would really like this. And then I would also recommend the book True Crime Story by Joseph Knox. This is one that I would especially recommend listening to on audio because the audiobook is full cast and they have so many cool sound effects, and I just thought the audiobook was so well done and really added to the experience of this book. It almost kind of reads like a true crime book, but it's not because it's fiction. But in this, we're following the mystery of this girl named Zoe Nolan who disappeared. It says she walked out of a party in the apartment where she'd been living for 3 months, and she was 19 and a student at Manchester University, and then she was never seen from again. There's this woman named Evelyn Mitchell, and she's kind of like a true crime journalist type of person. Basically, this is how Evelyn Mitchell is like doing a deep dive into this case of this girl Zoe Nolan that went missing. And so in this book, you not only get Evelyn Mitchell's like emails as she's like investigating this case, but then she also does like a bunch of interviews with all of Zoe's closest friends, including her sister. And so most of this story is told in like interview formats where you're just getting like the interview clips from all of her friends, which is why it's so cool to listen to this one on audio because it has like the full cast experience. Evelyn Mitchell is like emailing about the case, and on the audiobook it actually has like the typewriter sounds during the emailing scenes, which I thought was really cool. Evelyn Mitchell, like her character in this book, she's actually emailing with Joseph Knox, who's like technically the author of this book. So it's like almost one of those stories where like the author inserts themselves into a fictional story and it makes it feel more like eerie and real somehow. And that aspect of the book honestly like really threw me off and really confused me because I'd be like, wait, like, is this real? But it's not. Like, it's definitely all fiction, but it definitely throws you off a little bit. But I thought this book was really interesting. I did end up giving this one around a 3-star, and the only reason why it didn't work perfectly for me is because I don't think that this book sticks the landing very well, and I feel like this book did leave me with a few questions at the end that I still would have preferred to have answers to. But I feel like this might just be trying to show how true crime can be so horrific, because it's like sometimes you never get answers for certain things, and that's just how life works, and like that's really scary. And then the last recommendation that I had for this video is going to be The Christmas Guest by Peter Swanson. And this one is actually a thriller novella, so it's only about like 100 to 150 pages. It's on the shorter side. And this is one that I also thought was really great on audio, because this one also has some really cool sound effects on the audiobook, and the audiobook is only like 3 hours long. And basically the story of this one is how this girl is going to be going over to her classmate's family's house for Christmas. And so it's kind of like a simple setup, but then like I love the atmosphere. Like once she gets to the house, like some creepy like weird shit starts happening and she starts to feel uncomfortable, and there's like creepy Santa vibes in this one. Like this definitely is such a fun thriller that I would recommend to read around Christmas time. I really wish that thriller novellas like this would be more of a thing. Like I think thriller novellas are so fun. I also wish that Peter Swanson would like make more thrillers like this that are themed around the different holidays, because you know how much fun it would be to get a thriller novella like this that's like set around Halloween or even set around like New Year's time. Like I think that would be so cool and so much fun. So this one was definitely worth checking out. All right, those are all of the different thriller recommendations that I have for you today. You'll have to let me know if you've read any of these books. What did you think of them? And if you have any thriller books that you would recommend to me, then please do let me know, because I am always looking for more thriller book recommendations. As I mentioned before, you know, I have done videos like this 12 different times in the past. So if you're looking for some more thriller recommendations, I'll have all 12 of those past videos linked down below. But thank you so much for watching. As always, I really do appreciate you for being here, and I will see you very soon with another video. Bye!